Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Barton, and this is Tyler Hogan, and we are coming to you from Bright Ideas Press. We'd like to talk to you a little bit this morning about the digital mapping program that we have called WonderMaps. And it is a gem, but I think sometimes it's a little known gem. Thank you. So, Tyler, with that, we'll let you take it away. What inspired you to create WonderMaps?
So I've always loved maps ever since I was a little kid. And I remember when I was in junior high, we were doing a ancient civilization study. And one of the mapping assignments that we did was to take a map of Israel, because it was ancient civilizations in the Bible. And we started with just, a very simple outline map. And instead of actually drawing directly on the outline map to label, cities and routes and, the borders of the 12 tribes and that sort of thing, we took overhead transparency sheets, real old school stuff that we could still find at Staples, and some wet erase markers, and we would put our sheets over top of the outline map and make all of our markings on that. And then every time we had to do another map later on in history, we would take another transparency sheet and make another layer of that map. And the neat thing about it was you got to see what things were consistent and what things changed over time, and how the borders in one time period would not necessarily interact, but influence where the borders were later on, and who conquered what areas. And it was just so fascinating to see, oh, so this same place where, King David had gone, Jesus walked that same route. Or it's just helped make a lot of different connections
Yeah.
that I don't think I ever would have noticed before if we hadn't had that layering system. So when we were looking at what we could do with digital mapping, being able to have layers that you could just turn on and off with the click of a button and see either historical overlays, or just make the maps as customizable as possible, and be able to look at maps from the same area in different time periods. That was a big inspiration, was just how flexible that overhead transparency thing made it. And it made me want to make cool maps like that helped people make connections that they wouldn't otherwise have made.
So would you show us a little bit about how those layers work that you're referencing? I
Sure.
understand the whole, we had those transparency sheets too in the day, so I get that, but this is a new ball game.
Sure. So this is the main screen when you open up WonderMaps. You can see it's in Adobe Reader, so you'll need to make sure that you have Adobe Reader on your computer in order to use WonderMaps. But let me pull up. Let's go to one of the historical maps, and we'll go take a peek at. Let's look at the Civil War. That's a pretty good one. Oh, went a little too far. So here's a map of the American Civil War, and you can see over on the left-hand side, we've got a list of layers, and there's a little eyeball icon, and you can turn each of these layers off and on. So like this is the color topography. So if I need to kind of flatten it out, I can just turn that off, and it simplifies the map, maybe makes it a little bit easier to print if I'm going to have a printing application.
Mhm.
Um, but all of these can be turned off and on. So like if I want to get rid of the key at the top, um, or the lines of latitude and longitude, or get rid of all of the cities and state names and just leave the battle sites. Um, I can take off some of the physical features, the shading for Union versus Confederate, get rid of state borders if I want to. Like all of these things can be controlled individually down to, all right, a very, very simple outline map. So what I really like about this is that you can use this same file in dozens of different ways. So if I want to have a blank outline map and add everything myself, I can do that. I could add in, just borders and maybe rivers to make it a little bit easier to locate places. I could put in all of the lovely little dots, and then label the battle sites myself. And I can use that key or not use that key depending on what my goals are. And you can see it's just exceedingly flexible.
One of the things I really appreciate about WonderMaps in light of the rest of our range at Bright Ideas Press is that we're so focused on creating curriculum that is flexible for multiple ages of students in your home so that you're getting the maximum value for your curriculum investment. And I found that to be extraordinarily true of WonderMaps, that you can get all the way down to those outline maps and just put on capitals or the most major political features, or some simple geographical features. But for that's to start kids out to just knowing where things are. But then once you get in middle school and high school, there's so much detail to enrich a study in almost any subject, that this was really a tool that we used from kindergarten to graduation and can still use today beyond graduation.
Yeah, I find having a map handy makes almost any subject that we're studying that much richer. Even something that's not necessarily academic, like we've got a bunch of maps in here of Bible times. So like here's a map of Jesus's ministry, and you can see there's a key down here that has chronological events, a description, and where in scripture you can find those events, and they correspond to all these little numbers up here. So you could use this just as a reference map, for your own personal devotional use, or if you wanted to get rid of the numbers and find those places yourself. You can again take it all the way down to very bare bones kind of an outline map that you fill in yourself, and just give yourself the key and work from there to build it on your own. But I find that even something like personal devotions, it's helpful to be able to see who's going where, when, and then you can start asking the why and the deeper questions about the passage.
Well, knowing where it happened on the planet, since we're still on the planet, if we're talking about something that is far removed from us geographically, or if we're talking about something that's removed from us and chronologically, bringing it back to where it happened on this same place that we exist just makes it that much more real and tangible to us in anything we study. I think you're right. So Tyler, when we're customizing our maps, can you show us a little bit more about the features of how it is that I can customize a map for the needs of my student?
Sure. So I've showed mostly historical maps so far. Let's take a look at a US map. So if I click on the USA button, I can click on any of these states and pull up a state map, or I can take a look at the regions menu and get a view of a certain region, or even like territories and possessions. So let's look at my personal favorite state, Delaware.
I wonder
And
why.
Adobe Reader has a great little suite of commenting tools. So if I click on my commenting tools, a new bar will appear up here, and I can do things like highlight the capital city, or underline the most populous city in the state. I can add my own text box for Delaware Bay, and then I can resize it, or change the font or coloration if I want to. I have draw tools, so I can take a little pencil icon and mark it. Again, there's color and line thickness options that you can mess with. And then there's shapes, like if I just want to draw a quick arrow from Delaware to New Jersey, it's just a couple clicks. And I can save all of this so that the next time I open it up, it'll still be there and it'll remember all of the things that I've done to mark up this map. And if I want to go and print it, I can choose whether or not to print the comments, or all the little adjustments that I've made, or whether I want it to just print what what came with the software. And I've got all of the same kinds of layers over here, so capitals, cities, state names, rivers, and I can even make it black and white if I need to do that.
See, I found this to be helpful both in the teacher role and in the student role because, as a teacher, I can be customizing a map to be a reference piece for our lesson. But for the student, to be able to show them these basic tools, even at a young age, a child can hop on and make their own edits, or you can make a list, a suggested activity list for them. And it really helps them to enjoy the mapping program because they've created their own thing. I mean, every student loves to have their own creations.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a sense of accomplishment and achievement when you've made something and customized it and really made it your own. And because these tools are so versatile, you can use it for tracing the routes of different explorers, or creating historical boundaries for an obscure country that doesn't exist anymore. So there's just so many different uses for it, and I love that flexibility.
Once you have a map where you want it to be, can I print it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, let me show you. I'm not gonna save these particular changes, but let me show you another one of the maps. So if I go to, we'll look at from the main screen again. If I click on the world, I can find a certain area that I might want to print. Like if I click on Oceania and say, all right, give me a map of Australia. So this brings this map up, and I can just hit the print button, and my normal print dialog box will pop up, and it'll print this whole page out. If I change the layers, like let's say I need this to be black and white, I just turn off that layer, and now you can see in the print preview exactly what I have on my screen displays. And I can even, if I wanted to, like let's say I don't need a map of all of Australia, I'm really interested in New South Wales. So I can zoom in using the zoom tools up here. So there's the little plus and minus button. I can zoom in here, and then if I hit my print button again and change from print all to print current view, you'll see it'll focus in on just what my screen has, and then I change the page sizing to click on fit, and now I have a whole page map of just what I have zoomed in on, and I can print that. So there's a lot of flexibility with the printing functions as well.
And the overlays help so much with just basic ink costs because we all know how expensive it can be to be printing things all the time. So it's beautiful to see this on the screen, but to be able to toggle the visibility on and off for the overlays is a wonderful feature for that cost reduction.
Yeah, and if you want to keep the topography, there's, in most of the cases where there's a color overlay, there's also a black and white version. So if you don't have a color printer, there's one that's already optimized for a black and white printer.
That's fantastic. You've been walking around just a bit with us between the different types of maps. Could we look at that a little bit more specifically? What maps are included in WonderMaps?
Sure. So if I go back to the main menu, there's 4 big buttons here. There's historical maps, there's maps of the world, maps of the United States, and thematic maps. So with our world maps, you just have to click around and look at, all right, let's zoom in on Europe, and you can tell, whoops, clicked a little too fast there. You can tell there's a whole bunch of maps right here. So if I want to say, all right, just show me the map of Greece, I can click the button over here, but they're also linked. So the red 20 shows me this red 20 box right here, which is a little box highlighting exactly what I would be getting if I were to open up that map. So I can be very specific with the areas that I want to look at, either visually or just looking at the text. So we've got maps of all of the continents, maps of the whole world, ocean maps, polar maps. There's a pretty big range of maps right there. And then I showed the United States maps earlier. You've got all the states, you've got US regions, territories and possessions, maps of the US as a whole, with or without the non-contiguous states, depending on your needs. The historical maps is probably the biggest part of the map library. So this is arranged as a timeline. So you can see we've got the date on the left-hand side, and it starts in ancient civilizations, and there's just pages and pages going through Middle Ages, Renaissance, and Reformation, and then all the way up to modern days. And then lastly, we've got the thematic maps. And some of these are collections of the historical maps. So like here's all of the biblical maps. Here's a collection of all of the Chinese dynasties that we have maps for, or maps of different Native American tribes and events. There's a section for all of our explorer maps, if you're doing the Age of Exploration. American history maps, the World Wars, 20th century treaties, and then there's some neat science maps here for like tectonic plates. And then some of my favorites are the space maps. So you can like click on the moon and you get a map of the moon, and you can do the same things with these kinds of maps. You know, you zoom in and you've got layers that show, all right, I want to see all of the Apollo landing sites, and you can turn those on or off. Or turn on and off the topographical features and sea names. So there's a whole bunch of maps in here. And then there's also another feature that a lot of people don't know about, which is if you use the Mystery of History or All American History, you can click on these little buttons up here. And for each volume, there's a map guide, and then also all of the maps that are in the book. So I can click on Mystery of History Volume 3 maps, and it'll bring up, these are exactly the same things that are going to be in your companion guide, both the outline maps and the answer key maps are going to be in here as well. And then the map guides, this is really fun. We went through each lesson and said, all right, if there's a map somewhere in WonderMaps that would be a useful visual aid for this lesson, here's the week and lesson number and name. So let's say we're in week 1 and we're reading about Cosimo de' Medici and the rise of the Italian Renaissance. Well, there's a couple of different wonder maps that might be useful. There's a map of modern day Italy. So you could pull that one up. And you've got all your layers over here if you need to simplify it, if it's too much detail. But then there's also a map of the Italian Renaissance that shows you the same area, but split into the republics and duchies of that time. And there's some of the historical maps also have a modern overlay, so you can turn on and off modern borders and see how those interact with or overlap with the old-fashioned borders.
That's been one of our favorite features because you can understand oftentimes, you can know intellectually that an event happened, but if you can see geographically what elements may have impacted border decisions or even conflict, like you can see why their positioning on the planet affected a given event when you put those layers juxtaposed against one another. We really enjoyed that piece.
Absolutely. Like here's another good example. This is another historical map. Let's look at Europe's Age of Discovery. So this map right here it's very busy, but it's got English, French, Dutch, Italian, Russian, Portuguese, and Spanish voyages of exploration, and the areas of land that they claimed, along with a modern overlay. So this is another example of being able to really customize it. You can get rid of the modern borders, and you can focus in on, well, let's just take a look at what the Spanish and English were doing. And you can see, here's the voyages that their explorers took, and here are their various land claims. And again, you can turn the key off and on. You can do just the land claims and not look at the routes that the explorers took. So it's just got that tremendous amount of flexibility. But like when you look at all of the claims together, you start to see, okay, there's potential for conflict here as these countries are butting up against each other.
This is a particularly interesting one. And like you said, it can look a little overwhelming when you first pull it up with every option. But when you strip it away and you learn that in stages, and then you get a perspective of seeing all of it interacting, it's significant the deductions that you can make from now having that perspective of knowledge.
Yeah,
What other
having
maps
being
would
able
you
to think like a geographer and ask, okay, where is this? Why is it there? And why does that matter? What's the historical context, and or there's the social context, or the physical geography that impacts, where these things happened. It's really eye-opening. It's a lot of fun too.
Are there any other specific maps that you'd like us to know?
Oh goodness, there's just so much in here. If you wanted to just, get into it and start poking around, you'll just find so many neat maps of so many different places. I hardly even know what else to highlight for you. There's lots of different views of the world. Um, like I said, the historical map library is it's enormous. There's hundreds of them.
I think exactly what you're saying is one of the key benefits to WonderMaps because why don't you talk just a little bit about the advantage of having an electronic atlas versus, I have this printed atlas here that's already in our classroom or in our library. Why do I need a digital atlas?
That's a really good question. So paper atlases are great and I love them, but they don't offer nearly the kinds of flexibility that an electronic atlas has. Paper atlases go out of date, not so much with historical atlases, but modern reference atlases, they go out of date so quickly. If you're using the same one that you used, back in your high school days, things have changed. Like the USSR isn't a thing anymore.
Yeah, we
There's
don't want to
countries
talk
in
about how long
Africa
that's been.
there's countries in Africa that keep changing their names, every 3 or 4 years. It goes back and forth. New countries pop up. South Sudan wasn't in the atlases that I used as a kid, but it's its own country now. So the fact that an electronic atlas is going to be able to stay up to date, and we push out updates, every few years. We'll make a new version of WonderMaps. This is version 1.2. And it's nice to be able to just have an atlas that updates itself and has the layer flexibility. Like you can't get that from a paper atlas. That's not an option. um, yeah, I like having electronic atlas because I can just look at the things that I need or print out exactly what I need and tailor it to my goals for the day.
Well, I can see then the benefits of having a digital atlas, but we kind of Google everything. Why not just Google these maps then?
So there's a lot of great online map resources, and Google Maps and Google Earth are definitely high among that list. And if you're just needing to find something real quick, that might be the fastest and easiest option. But what Google doesn't have is a great library of maps centered around a theme. So you're not going to find an easy set of historical maps for just the time period and area that you're looking for. And you're not going to find things that have the kind of customization that you want. Google has some options. You can change from street views or satellite views, and some kinds of political views, and those are good. But you can't really just finesse the level of detail to be exactly what you need for your junior high student who's trying to find this place, and there's not enough on that children's atlas that they were using, so they need something a little bit more detail. Or your younger student who only has a high school level atlas and it's got too much detail and you need to tone it down a little for them and make it easier for them to read. Like WonderMaps has all of that customization for you.
One of the things that I liked about it too is the safety of it because in elementary years it's not so very difficult to teach a young child how to be able to use these tools and be able to draw and edit maps and create their own atlas by the time they're done with a year's study. But to let that same young elementary child loose on the internet to go find all of these things, who knows what they're going to find at this point in time. So to say, oh, here's WonderMaps, I know they're in a safe place and they can experiment to their heart's content.
Yeah, the only ads on here are for, homeschool curriculum.
Those are pretty safe. So speaking of curriculum, Tyler, and very specific maps, if you're not familiar with Bright Ideas Press range, we have a world history program called The Mystery of History. We have a U.S. history program called All American History. So Tyler, tell us why it is that, and how it is that WonderMaps can help us in our studies with either The Mystery of History or All American History.
Sure. So going back to the home screen, we've got buttons for each of those curricula, and you can go and say, all right, I want to see all of the maps from this volume. And these are maps that, I'm sorry, that's the map guide. If I want maps directly from the book, I can see exactly what maps are in the companion guide, how many of them I need to print out depending on the age of my student, and I can go and pick out specific outline maps or answer key maps and print them out. So it's nice to just have all of those things in one place, especially if you're the kind of person who would typically have a paper companion guide instead of using a digital copy. This is great just for the mapping because it's all easy to use, easy to find, and just very, very convenient. You don't have to worry about making photocopies of a certain page X number of times because it's all right there for you. But even more useful are the map guides, which I showed a little bit earlier for volume 3, because they go lesson by lesson and just tell you, hey, this map might be useful as you're discussing this topic. And I think it's great just to have all of that laid out for you. You don't even have to go through and think about what maps you might need. They're all just laid out for you.
I love that preparation tool. Anything that we can do to make preparation and printing a little bit easier in advance, I think all teachers are going to appreciate. So let's touch then just about the teacher's guide, because again, that ease of use for the teacher is so important. What have we built in to help our teachers?
So there's a couple of things in here. There's a tutorial video that you can watch. There's a user's manual that you can even print out if you want, just in case you need a refresher on how to use some of these features. There are some extra bonus workshop MP3s. There's 2 of them, Loving Geography and then Packing a Punch with Timelines and Maps. And these are workshops that I gave at some different homeschool conventions that just tell you a little bit more about how to teach geography or how to use maps and timelines, not just in history and geography studies, but as a part of any subject in your curriculum. And then there's also a number of different resources over on this side, like a sample unit study on Joseph, some different easy mapping projects, 50 bright ideas for using outline maps. A lot of these are taken from a book that we published called Hands-On Geography, and it's just a great kind of gentle way to start using maps. If you're not someone who's already using maps a lot, this is a great way to get the creative juices flowing and give you some gentle introductions to making maps a part of your everyday homeschool.
Well, and beyond using this as a tool to support us in history and in geography, to be able to just use it standalone to start out with some basic mapping skills. We've offered so many resources here, like even creating that salt dough map. I don't think any student should get through their learning experiences without being able to make a cookie or a salt dough map and have those fun hands-on experiences. So even if you're not using WonderMaps in conjunction with another study, it stands alone to have its own study in mapping skills.
Absolutely.
So Tyler, we've touched on what helps we have for teachers, and I think maybe we've had the focus of thinking about that homeschool mom who's doing prep for her family. But what about WonderMaps lends itself well to a classroom environment if you have a co-op or a private school?
So we offer co-op and classroom licenses, and we also offer a church license. So if you're a Sunday school teacher or a pastor and you want to use some of these biblical maps, in a PowerPoint presentation or as handouts for your students, you can do that. And I find that just having a visible map can make a huge difference in people's being able to understand and process the material that you're discussing. One of the big things that my parents did that it's such a small thing, but it made a big difference for my brother and I as we were starting to understand geography was at our kitchen table, we had a poster-sized world map on the table and then like a clear plastic tablecloth on top of it. So as we're sitting around the table, there was a map. And we would talk about current events, or we would talk about history, or we would talk about some friend who's going on a trip somewhere, and we would find all those places on the map. And it just made everything much more tangible, and helped me to develop a love of geography and a love of learning, as we saw how big and small the world was and how connected it is. And it just made all of those faraway places seem so much more real to me as a little kid. So whether you're using them as part of a curriculum, or for personal devotions, or as part of family discussion, or as part of your classroom, I mean, you can take these maps to like an office supply store and get them printed out poster size if you wanted to. There's just so many uses for them, no matter what subject you're discussing. Like I've seen people who have made maps for their study of classical composers, or butterfly migration maps as they're studying zoology. Like everything happens somewhere, so you can put pretty much anything on a map, and that'll make your study that much deeper, that much richer. And it's so good, especially for visual learners. They really need that kind of visual stimulus. It's just essential for them.
Well, and to have that constant reinforcement that once you've printed it out, to even to just make it placemat size, and to have at a child's study area or at their place at the table, each child could have something different that they're focused on learning, and so they can have that consistent reminder. And even it sounds old fashioned now, but to even be able to add stickers and use wax crayon or dry erase
Oh yeah.
markers to make something on top of that laminated copy, just that consistent seeing it all the time builds retention.
Yeah, these maps are yours. Make them place maps, laminate them, put them up on your walls. Like, you can do whatever you want with them.
That's fantastic. Tyler, this is so much more than you can find in buying an atlas or doing that Google search. And we just really appreciate you taking the time today to show us how much enrichment could be added to your studies through WonderMaps. So if you would like to find a copy of WonderMaps for your family, you can purchase it at any homeschool supplier. If you happen to see that they don't have WonderMaps in stock, send them a note and say, hey, I'd like to have this product from Bright Ideas Press. If you have any difficulty finding it at all, just send us a note, contact@brightideaspress.com. If, however, you're an administrator, a teacher, a classroom leader of any type, and you'd like to buy in volume, we would be glad to send you a box or a pallet. Just send us a note again at contact@brightideaspress.com, and we'll be glad to help you with volume purchasing as well. Tyler, it's been a great time with you today learning a little bit more about our world and WonderMaps.
Thank you, Susan.